There are 3 basic levels of thought when it comes to approaching a poker hand. As your understanding of poker evolves and your skills improve, you'll then get to like levels 4, 5, 6, and 7, and so on. But each level after the first 3, they basically just repeat themselves. The first thing we need to focus on is, what do I have? That's about as simple as it gets, really, and that's why it's level 1 thinking. As a beginning player, you need to be able to look at your cards, look at the board, and then figure out not only what you have, but what cards you need, and then throw in the probability of one of your cards coming. The second thing you need to think about is, what do they have? Again, that's pretty simple as well. Once you've figured out what you have and whether or not it's a good hand, the next thing you need to consider is what your opponents may or may not have. You do that by focusing on their betting patterns, both past and present. Any information you have on your opponent's past betting patterns will help you with the current dilemma. Other things to think about, even before you get to their betting patterns, are what cards they like to play and how they like to play them. Does my opponent like to limp in or raise with a pair of aces? Does my opponent play loosely from early position, or are they real tight? The questions become even more complicated after the flop. Would my opponent bet so much if he had a flush draw, for example? Does my opponent like to set traps for me on the flop and go for the check raise? Again, there are so many variables to think about when putting your opponent on a hand, and the best way to do that is to ask yourself various questions and go to your memory bank for answers. The third basic principle to think about is, what do they think I have? Now, this is a question related to your table image, meaning how others perceiving you and the way you played your hands. Remember, while you're trying to figure out what your opponents have, your opponents, in turn, are trying to figure out what you have as well. When it comes to level 3 thinking, the first thing you'll need to think about is how your opponents perceive you. For example, if they've seen you bluff several hands in a row and were paying attention, they may have you pegged as a mad bluffer making bluffs in the situation less effective for you. Or, conversely, they may perceive you as a weak, straightforward player that never bluffs. In this case, a well-timed bluff, well, that may work very well. Just like you would when figuring out your opponent, you need to delve into your memory bank and go over hands that you've played against these opponents. Remembering how both you and they have played similar situations in the past hands is key. For example, the last time you flopped top pair, you went for the check raise, and the last time you flopped a drawing hand, you bet right out against your opponent. So let's say you flop top pair again. What you need to think about is this. If I bet right out this time, will he put me on a flush draw, or will he think I'm using reverse psychology? Chances are, your opponent, if he's perceptive that is, will think your bet means you have a draw. What he doesn't know is that you have delved into your memory bank as well and are going to use that information against him. I know that you know that I know that you know. You know what I'm saying? And in essence, that is your introduction to levels 4 and up. Level 4 being, what does he think I think he has? The levels never really stop, and that's when poker becomes more of a chess game. When both you and your opponent know so much about each other that you're constantly mixing up your game using reverse psychology and maybe even a little reverse psychology. Just remember to always stay one step ahead of your opponents, and you'll do just fine.